This is where I usually say Heartbeeps is the best comedy you've never seen. But this is not actually the case. It gets better. Hey everyone, my name is Ryan and welcome to another best comedy you've never seen. Except for this video, I'm doing something a bit different because this is far from being the best comedy you've ever seen. In fact, I don't even think it should be labeled as a comedy. The humor in Heartbeeps is few and far between, and the humor that we get often doesn't come from its star comedian Andy Kaufman, and this is surprising, as you would think casting someone like Andy Kaufman is something that you would use to your utmost advantage. Heartbeeps actually kind of neuters Andy, though he does give an incredible nuanced performance as an on-the-run robot just looking to find out what lies beyond the horizon. Andy Kaufman was a weird addition to the comedy scene of the late 70s and early 80s. He was known for his outlandish, surreal, and weird humor seen on shows like Saturday Night Live and ABC's oft-forgotten but still incredible sketch comedy show Fridays. He started wrestling women, and then got into threatening Jerry the King Lawler, an incredible wrestler who was more than happy to take Andy down. Audiences had no clue that they were watching reality TV at its finest. It seemed like it was real life, but all of that was completely staged by Kaufman and Lawler. Though Kaufman did have some bit parts in other films, his only starring role was Heartbeeps, which was a colossal failure in its time and a very obscure movie today. Not many people have heard of it. Is it the greatest comedy of all time? No. No, it's not. But Heartbeeps is worth taking a look at for several reasons. The plot of Heartbeeps is very simplistic. Andy plays Val, who is a malfunctioning robot being stored in a warehouse. Basically, Val has been shelved and is made to just stand there and wait for someone to finally come along and fix him. Val is soon joined by two other robots. The first is a female robot named Aqua, who is played by Bernadette Peters. The duo almost immediately fancy each other in some weird way, something similar to maybe how Wally felt about Eve. Val and Aqua are soon joined by a wise-cracking robot named Catskill, who could only spit out one-liners, and so a good amount of comedy comes from his bad jokes.
What about the guy who was killed by a weasel?
He was sitting on a railroad track, and the train came along, and he didn't hear the weasel.
You see, comedy gold. Actually, the jokes do get better.
I'm attempting to study those tall perennial trees that cover those distant mountains. I need to take a field trip.
Val and Aqua decide they want to find out what is beyond some trees, so they simply decide to walk out of the warehouse to find out what is out there, followed closely by Catskill, and they walk right past Cousin Eddie, Baron Harkonnen, and the neighbor from Gremlins, and just simply leave. Right away, the audience figures out that this world is really not like the future. The world is 1980s, complete with 1980s technology, except for these robots. The robots are limited by their programming. They're more akin to C-3PO than HAL. So the threesome are off on their walkabout. Once the warehouse boss finds out that the robots are missing, Cousin Eddie and Baron Harkonnen are sent out to track them down. Except there's one big problem, and that's the Crime Buster Deluxe. The Crime Buster Deluxe is an unstoppable killer police robot tank with a flamethrower and machine guns. It really can be considered the precursor to the Ed 209.
Crime Buster Deluxe reporting for duty as ordered, sir. The Crime Buster always gets his man.
The great part is the Crime Buster Deluxe talks, most often to itself, and most of the comedy comes from the mission it decides to go on to hunt down these robots and enforce the law, often to the nth degree.
Darkness makes crime fighting difficult, but not impossible. There, that's a lot better.
Random things occur, like Val and Aqua building a robot they name Phil, who can carry spare parts. They come to a town, and Crime Buster Deluxe finds them, and Val uses what I call the funny bot takedown, that uses common logic and paradoxes to freak Crime Buster Deluxe out and send him running.
Robots cannot be criminals because we are bound by a robot litany.
You cannot be robots because you're criminals.
Logic and efficiency.
But you cannot be criminals because you're robots.
Crime Buster eventually comes to its senses and goes back to being a psychotic law officer tank, attacking a party where Val and Aqua decide to hide out at.
Your police department would like to thank you for cooperating with this investigation.
The foursome reach a junkyard where they meet two junkers. These two junkers talk to the robots for a bit before telling them that the junkyard is nowhere for them to be. Really, they should go back to the warehouse to be amongst their own kind. And you know what?
There's only one place for you to go.
The factory?
The robots agree, and they decide to go back. And that's basically the movie. I mean, there's a bit more at the very, very end, tacked on just so there's some sort of happy ending, but really, that's the film. To summarize, Heartbeeps is a comedy film where we have two robots leave a warehouse and wander the woods, not doing much, and after not doing much, they head back and go to a warehouse. The movie is about 1 hour and 15 minutes long, so it barely qualifies as a full-length film. It's a perfect runtime for a kids' movie, and that's the target audience that Heartbeeps is trying to aim for because, you know, kids love robots. Well, if you liked robots when there was laser swords and menacing bad guys, but a robot tripped through the woods, kids didn't go for it. I mean, nobody went for it. The movie was a spectacular failure, grossing just $2 million against a $10 million budget. Plans for a Tony Clifton movie, which was a lounge singer character that Kaufman would portray, were then scrapped, and Kaufman would never star in another film before his death in 1984. Kaufman himself hated the film, even taking a moment to apologize on the David Letterman show.
For example, when I made that movie Heartbeeps, and it got terrible reviews, and I rightfully so. It was a terrible movie. I would like to personally apologize to each and every one of you for me being in that movie.
So why feature a film that really isn't that funny in a series titled Best Comedy You've Never Seen? It is because it is simply a comedy that most people haven't heard of. And if you go in knowing what it is, you might find that there's a lot of great in Heartbeeps. And there are things I really love about this film. Let's start with the music. It was composed by John Williams, who was at the top of his game in 1981 after scoring Jaws, Star Wars, Close Encounters, Superman, and so many more. It is a big get for a film like this, but the music is a bit more nuanced than, say, Star Wars. That's okay, because having a legend scoring Heartbeeps really elevates the flick. It is John Williams right at the time when he was at his creative peak. Second is the makeup, which was done by Stan Winston. After Heartbeeps, Winston would create creature effects and makeup for some of the best movies of the 80s, 90s, and beyond, to include The Thing, The Terminator, Monster Squad, Predator, Jurassic Park, and so many more. For his work on Heartbeeps, Winston was nominated for an Academy Award. That award was for Best Makeup, which was a brand new award that had just been created.
And those nominees are Werewolf in London,
Stan Winston for Heartbeeps.
Winston didn't win, but it just shows the great care and abilities of the Hollywood creature legend. Phil is the tiny robot created by Val and Aqua. The very cool thing about Phil is that he was voiced by Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead. I mean, how great is that? The downside is Phil doesn't really talk. It's really just bloops and bleeps. But still, Jerry Garcia. The robot named Catskill has that name for a reason. The Catskills in New York once had a plethora of summer resorts where many comedians used to play for large crowds who would vacation there in the Catskills. That included many famous comedians like Andy Kaufman himself, Rodney Dangerfield, Billy Crystal, Joan Rivers, and Henny Youngman. Henny Youngman was called the king of the one-liners. He had those "take my wife, please" kind of jokes.
I take my wife everywhere, but she finds her way home.
You're beautiful, sweetheart. What do you comb your hair with? A blowtorch?
If you watch Heartbeeps and think Catskill's jokes have that sort of ring, that is because they used Henny's jokes in the film.
If you are within the sound of my voice, turn yourself in now, and perhaps a deal can be made with the district attorney's office.
Once again, I'm going to point out the Crime Buster Deluxe. This psychotic police tank really does make the film. It had me laughing several times when it appeared. It was truly the big highlight of this film.
I gave them a chance to turn themselves in, but did they? No!
Heartbeeps isn't the kind of film that you'll be watching once a year, or falling to the floor, laughing and grabbing your sides and gasping for air, but I think it is a fun, cute film that is really worth discovering. Heartbeeps stars Andy Kaufman, Bernadette Peters, Randy Quaid, Kenneth McMillan, my 80s crush Melanie Mayron, Mary Warrenoff, Kathleen Freeman, and Nigel Christopher Guest. Thanks for watching. It really helps if you like, subscribe, and comment below, especially if you liked what you saw today. We will be back with another best comedy you've never seen, but until then, this is Ryan from 2G1, and I'll catch you next movie.
Floating like a ghost, gotta keep eyes on you. You'll sneak up behind me, touch me and I'm through. Unless I'm feeling big, just get a little bit belittled. It's hard to resist the physical thrill of jumping on top of you for the kill.
Did you hear about the guy who crossed the mink with a gorilla? He got a beautiful coat, but the sleeves are too long.